We now have two more prominent Democratic presidential candidates after this weekend. We have Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii. We have Julian Castro, former Secretary of HUD under Obama and former mayor of San Antonio, Texas. There are many identity games to be played here. Tulsi Gabbard, the first Hindu member of Congress, would be the first Hindu president. She's the first American Samoan member of Congress, would be the first Samoan president. Julian Castro could be the first Hispanic president. Wow. Okay, I'm not going to be playing any of those games in the Democratic primary. All right, I'll talk about identity politics actually on the Friday show in audience questions, but I'm not going to be playing those games. I'm not saying identity is not relevant, but I am going to focus on policy at this stage of the game. I've said before, playing identity games or electability games about who will Trump more successfully be able to make fun of, half the country doesn't vote, okay? Any good candidate can win on turnout alone. And during the primary, I'm going to focus on which candidate's politics align with mine, period. And we're going to start today. I'm not going to list a huge laundry list of issues on which Elizabeth Warren, Julian Castro, and Tulsi Gabbard agree. That doesn't make sense. We're going to focus on the differences. And unfortunately, with Julian Castro, we're still missing some of that key information since he may not have commented on all of these issues publicly. But what I can tell you is that based on everything I knew before this announcement about Tulsi Gabbard and Julian Castro, but more importantly, after doing deep dives into her politics over the weekend, which is much more on record, and Julian Castro, what I can tell you with certitude today is I will not be supporting Tulsi Gabbard over Elizabeth Warren, okay? From my knowledge of Julian Castro's politics, I would be sort of choosing between Warren and Castro, with my initial impression being that Castro is more of a sort of centrist corporate type Dem, whereas Elizabeth Warren, at least in rhetoric, is more of a progressive Democrat. But we're going to get into that in more detail as we learn more about Julian Castro's full platform. As far as Tulsi Gabbard, and again, I'm not playing the identity games or electability games. I'm simply telling you the policies of Tulsi Gabbard that push me away and towards Elizabeth Warren or maybe Julian Castro. That's what I'm going to get into today. And for people saying, well, why aren't you talking about Richard Ojeda? I interviewed Richard Ojeda, who's a West Virginia state rep a couple of weeks ago. I am not going to be supporting Richard Ojeda. I did not feel that he had a good understanding of a lot of economic and tax policy during our interview. He started talking about other Democrats as not being real Democrats. And I pointed out he voted for Trump in 2016. And I don't think that's a good attack. He's not my guy. OK, so at this point, I'm just going to talk about Tulsi Gabbard's position here. Number one, Tulsi Gabbard's policy platform on business regulation is reduce regulations on corporations. I don't subscribe to the idea that a primary pillar of improving our society will come from reducing regulations on business, period. Okay? Elizabeth Warren wants to establish more oversight on corporations. That's a perspective that is in line with my view. So that is an area I disagree with Tulsi Gabbard on. The foreign policy of Tulsi Gabbard is extraordinarily concerning to me. She has appeared on Fox News to praise Vladimir Putin and criticize Barack Obama's foreign policy towards Putin, which was a sort of initial red flag. Tulsi Gabbard has praised Russian intervention in Syria. I'm against that. Okay, an example tweet from Tulsi Gabbard about that issue says, quote, Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11 and must be defeated. Obama won't bomb them in Syria. Putin did. Hashtag never forget 9/11. I do not support intervention in Syria to help Bashar al-Assad retain power, period. That's not my politics. Gabbard voted against condemning the human rights abuses and war crimes of Bashar al-Assad's regime. That's not anything that I identify as the left I can get behind. That's the sort of Leninist left that I've sometimes referred to. Elizabeth Warren's position on that issue, on the other hand, is President Obama was right to seek congressional approval. She would prefer us not be involved in Syria. She wants troops out, but she understands that the situation's complex, involving the Kurds and many other factions, and it's important to know why Trump made the decision to pull troops from Syria when he made it. I agree with that. That's basically my position. I don't agree with Tulsi Gabbard's position on that issue. On gay marriage, you might say, well, hold on, everybody, all these candidates are for gay marriage. That's true. Tulsi Gabbard is currently for gay marriage, like all the other candidates so far, but she used to be anti-gay. She actually called activists for gay marriage, quote, homosexual extremists multiple times. And even though they've all arrived at what are very similar positions today, I would still find relevant that she at any point, although good for her that she changed her mind, used this language about people who said, hey, we should be able to get married as well. Tulsi Gabbard also tweeted once, when we talk about conspiracy type stuff, that Turkey is a supporter of ISIS. That is simply not true. And lastly, her political action committee, Tulsi PAC, funds a lot of sort of centrist and more right-wing Democrats over progressive Democrats. So the way that money is allocated in that way is not in line with my politics. So what I'm saying, Pat, is she's too far right for me, okay? I don't support Assad defenders. I don't support people who dabble in unfounded conspiracies. So for right now, I'm with Elizabeth Warren. I'm going to spend some more time today researching Julian Castro, and we're going to go from there. And you know as well as I do, Pat, I'm going to take heat for this. I'm going to take heat for this because Tulsi Gabbard is popular in certain circles of the left, but it's not my politics.
What I will say for now is it's great that the three major presidential candidates, Elizabeth Warren, Tulsi Gabbard, and Julian Castro, they all support Medicare for all. And they're, of course, the first three to announce their candidacy. So it's making the standard in the Democratic Party one that you have to support Medicare for all to be taken seriously. We'll see if the other candidates follow suit, like if the establishment types, Biden, even Hillary Clinton, if they decide to run, we'll see if they adopt that position too. That's very good. And then from there, we can decide who is the most progressive, who's the best candidate. But having that as a starting point, that's major.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And we've been hoping, actually, that Medicare for all, not a litmus test, but just how can you support the system we have or small tweaks to it, given its major failures. That doesn't sound very progressive. Last thing I want to mention on this. I'm not going to be influenced by Tulsi Gabbard having endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016. Okay. Last night when I was researching, I tweeted on my Twitter account at Pakman, what do you see as the primary distinguishing factors between Warren, Castro, and Gabbard? And a bunch of people told me Warren endorsed Hillary, did not endorse Bernie Sanders, played coy, waited around, and then endorsed Hillary. Castro just wasn't a big player in 2016. And Tulsi Gabbard endorsed Bernie Sanders. What about that? I'm going to evaluate Tulsi Gabbard based on her positions, okay? I'm not going to be swayed by the fact that in 2016, she liked Bernie Sanders the most. That's not really a factor for me at this point in time because she now is running. She has her own positions. Notice, I want to go back to this. I've said nothing about electability. I've said nothing about identity stuff. There are major differences here in these candidates in terms of who will actually be a player in the 2020 Democratic primary. Just from the three people I talked about today, I don't think all three of them are going to be major players in the primary, but I'm not dealing with that right now. I'm focusing on policy and what's knowable from public statements. And that is the way I am going to handle this primary. And I know that there are people who are going to email me and say, David, you should be considering things like who can go toe-to-toe with Trump's insult style, who is actually going to appeal to the amorphous Midwestern Democrat or the Southern Blue Dog Democrat or whatever. Voter turnout is 50%. Okay, the right candidate can defeat Donald Trump, and I'm going to focus on policy. Send me your thoughts. Make sure you're following the show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Make sure you're following me at david.pakman on Instagram. We'll be taking questions there about the 2020 slate of candidates.